All right. It's episode 49 of Stick to Hockey Live. There I am, Jason Martinez. Hello. And Anthony DeMarco coming to us from some French street in Montreal. You sent me your address for something I have to send you. I was like, oofa, I can't even pronounce that.
Yeah. It's even hard for someone who grew up in Montreal to sometimes pronounce these names, but it's not like Schuyler Street or Scott Avenue. It's like Rue des Gérards. So I mean, with an accent aigu in there. So it even kind of fucks me up sometimes. But
I don't even know what you just said.
Exactly.
I told you the story about the train ticket machine in. Oh man, I'm such an idiot. I was like the ultimate tourist when we were up there in 2010 for the conference final. But I love the city. It's a great city.
It's especially if you want to come down here just for like a night out with the boys or something. It's about as good as you can get. That's for sure.
So can you house me and my boy, my son Evan, for the Canadian Grand Prix? It's right outside the city, right? In that little island thing.
It's on Parc Jean Drapeau, which is it's basically right beside. I live about 45 minutes outside of downtown. So you could stay out here, but a lot of people like to be right in the action downtown.
Yeah,
but if you don't mind that
race though, that's a lot of narrow.
100%, 100%. But you're right in the action. Like one of the main streets here is called Crescent. And they always just close Crescent Street just for like a complete gong show downtown. But
so it's just
Montreal in the summer is a fun time. You even have Heavy Montreal. You have Il Sonic, which is like an electronic event. You have Osheaga. No, it's a great place to be in the summer, and F1 as well. I've had many fun nights with F1.
Yeah, they're back. They were back last year, and I may have to do that. Me and Evan may have to road trip up there and check that out. It's not even a bad drive, especially that time of year. It's beautiful. There's a ton to talk about today, and the team has wrapped up that 4-game homestand with a record of 1-2-1. The one win was the one over Edmonton, which was a spectacular one. All 4 games are 1-goal games. They lose the first one against the Isles 2-1. They win the second one 2-1 in the shootout, obviously over the Edmonton Oilers. They then lose in overtime to the Nashville Predators 2-1, and then they lose 4-3 to Seattle. It didn't feel like a 4-3 game the way they played. I thought they played horribly in the first 2 periods. Third period, they were much better, but too late. But there's a lot of buzz around the team right now as they head out on this 4-game road trip, and they'll be back Thursday. And the buzz starts, obviously, as we're getting closer and closer to the deadline. Deadline's 2 weeks from this Friday, March 3rd. And I know you put out an article. I saw you and Dave both on social media talking about it. And I know, you put out something about Nick Seeler that I thought was really interesting. First, put out mention your report and what kind of you uncovered here.
Well, basically, and the boys on 32 Thoughts spoke about it on Monday morning. Before I didn't even listen to 32 Thoughts. I was, sort of talking my sources and writing it up, and then it was brought to my attention. So I'll give them credit. They mentioned that Nick Seeler's been drawing interest around the league. And that, the Flyers, I think Jeff Merrick used the term, they would have to have their socks knocked off. And when I was talking to my people in hockey ops, I was told that they would have to be blown away to part with Nick Seeler. And, a lot of people took that as, they're going to be looking for a first-round pick. He's untouchable. He's this and that. But a lot of this is that, and we brought it up right before we start recording here, is that, it's relative to the player. If you ask the Flyers in a candid moment, I think that they were blown away last year to have gotten a 4th-round pick for Derek Brassard. So same with me. I didn't even think he was going to get traded. And then Edmonton stepped up, gave him a 4th-round pick, and I don't even think he really played in the playoffs for them. So, I mean, you look at Nick Seeler, you can make the case that in his specific role, he's been their most consistent defenseman. And like I mentioned in my article, he has played the least amount of ice time consistently each and every game. So that has to be taken into consideration. But he's performed very well in that role. He brings a physical edge, which teams always like, especially when you're getting ready for a playoff run.
And you play for Torts.
Yeah, when you play for Torts. And probably the most important thing and the most attractive thing about the player is his contract. He's signed through next season at $775,000. And for a guy who, at least this year, has proven to be like a quality number 6 defenseman, that's close to league minimum. You have him signed through another year of the cap being flat. And I think that the Flyers aren't just going to give him away. And as Merrick alluded to on 32 Thoughts, for all the reasons teams want Nick Seeler is for all the reasons the Flyers maybe want to keep Nick Seeler.
Mm-hmm.
And I've gotten the sense that, and again, this is all like, I'll preface this all by saying like the Flyers don't have any untouchables in my opinion. And I think Elliot mentioned it as well. And I had mentioned last month that like in the case of Travis Konechny, like if you want him, you're going to have to step up big. But I think that the Flyers overall kind of are more encouraged by the way their defense has been playing. They want to get Travis Sanheim right, obviously. But you look at York and Provorov, and we could get into what I wrote about Provorov as well. But like, even if you want to bring up a Ronnie Adard next year, it may be beneficial to have a guy like Nick Seeler to play him with.
Yeah, that's the other element too. Is he makes $775? That's guaranteed also for next year. And he's proven this year that he can be your sixth defenseman. And even if you had to move him into being your seventh, the $775 is totally fine. You like you said, it's very close to league minimum. And, you know, for what he brings from a work standpoint, the way he conducts himself as a pro, you know, all of those things, if blown away would be getting a 5th round pick for Nick Seeler, no?
Yeah, like again, like I couldn't get specifics, and I don't even think that they've like narrowed down what the specifics
So a 3%
are.
chance, a player with a 3% chance to make the NHL in 4 years.
Like
That's what people are freaking about.
For me, it's like I think that anything a 4th or higher, it would probably have him get moved, especially this year. But the other thing about this is, and we discussed this a bit off the air as well, is like the Flyers aren't going to tell a media member just like, yeah, we'll trim for anything. Like, what kind of negotiation is
You're
that?
building
right?
value here. Yeah.
Exactly. Like clearly they've realized that Nick Seeler is a guy that teams are interested in because of his cost certainty and his close to league minimum AAV. And they're going to try and say like, okay, let's see how long we could string this out. And look, Nick Seeler isn't going to be the first, second, third, probably even in the top 5 to 6 defensemen to get moved here. You're going to see guys like Edmondson go and Gavrikov go, and that's not even counting the big names like Chychrun and Carlson. But when more teams start to get a bit more desperate and less options and are up against the cap, they may be willing to step up with a bit of an overpay. Like even Justin Braun last year for a 3rd round pick, like you can make the sense that that was an overpay, right?
Yeah.
But I know that the Flyers that day were trying to pry a 2nd round pick out of teams. And it was between the Edmonton Oilers and the New York Rangers. The Oilers paid a 2nd round pick for Brett Kulak. So they settled for a 3rd from the New York Rangers. And like, I think that's like, and I get it. And I understand that everyone is kind of like conditioned here to just think that like Chuck Fletcher's like spinning on a chair in his room, not doing anything.
Yeah.
But like, it's like the Flyers aren't in a position this draft year, this trade deadline where they're at the forefront. And I was told that yesterday. Like, it's not like last year where we had Claude and we had Ristolainen available right up until like 2 weeks before the deadline. A lot of the guys that they have available that are expected to be moved here are secondary players. Like JVR falls in that mix too. Justin Braun falls in that mix as well. Even Ivan Provorov. Like I think it's really a coin flip if he's moved. I would lean more on the side of no. But like
moved by the deadline or moved in general?
Moved by the deadline, but even in general, like I asked yesterday,
that's highly unlikely by the deadline. Teams just can't do the cap gymnastics to get there to be able to do that during, because you don't want to trade. Teams making moves at the deadline don't like to make moves where they also remove something from their roster. And the team
like a hockey trade.
Yeah, the teams that are, it's just too much to disrupt the room. It's too much to change in that regard. Now he's going to bump somebody out if you add somebody, but also the teams making moves at the deadline are looking more for, equity, prospects, draft picks, especially with this draft coming up. And Provorov is definitely a hockey trade because you're not trading him for draft picks. You're going to have to get a player in return.
Well, that's exactly it, right? And I had a lot of people saying like, oh, well, why are things quiet on the Provorov front? Like they should be working the phones. It's just like, but it's not the same thing. Like Jacob Chychrun isn't getting traded to LA for Quentin Byfield. Like hell, like there's a snag because the LA Kings don't want to give up Brent Clark, and he's not even a staple in the NHL at this point.
Yeah, you don't even know what he's going to be as an NHL player yet. But I feel like you're
Exactly.
starting to get a good idea.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, look, there's a lot of things, but even in the Provorov, like even if he was available, let's say, or he is available, let's just say like the Flyers were actively looking to move him, he's number 3 on the totem pole, but behind Chikrin and Erik Karlsson right now.
Yeah.
So in a lot of these situations, you kind of have to wait for teams to come to you, especially when you have secondary players. Like, look, JVR is going to get traded. Like I think that's like the ultimate slam dunk here. And they're probably going to get a second round pick for him.
Yeah.
But teams that are looking at JVR are probably going to exhaust the avenues of Ryan O'Reilly, or Tarasenko was the first domino to fall, Timo Meyer, even like a Barbashev, like there's other players ahead of him. Tyler Bertuzzi is another one. So I think that like the Flyers, based on the assets that they have, like it's not something where teams are going to be like blowing up their phones trying to get them. I think things are very quiet in Philly right now because of the players that are maybe going to be moved.
Saturday before the Nashville game, after I got done doing pregame show, I went up to the press box and I was getting my water out of the big cooler thing, and the anthem was just getting ready to start. And Chuck was right there, so we were just standing there listening to the anthem, respectfully. And then as soon as the anthem was over, I was talking to him, just a little off the record conversation. I'm not gonna say everything that we talked about, but I did ask him about the market. I said, this market seems a little clogged right now, like it needs a little Drano. I said, what has it been like? Has there been a lot? He's like, there's a ton of conversation. There's a lot of phone calls. But the big issue is this, he said. He said, at this point, with the deadline still 3 weeks away, it was Saturday, so it was 20 days away, teams have two issues with making the deal early. And here they are. Number one was obviously teams don't have a ton of cap space, and they need to have the trade happen closer to the deadline because of prorated salary. So every day that ticks off is another prorate of cap hit too, even if you retain all that stuff. So if you get right to March 3rd, it is hockey season 6 months long. That's what they get paid for, 182 days. Then obviously you've knocked a month of 1/6 of their cap hit off as well. That's number one. And he said, number two, a big issue right now for teams is they have to wait closer to the deadline because of LTIR. They have players on LTIR, but they don't know if players are coming back before the end of the season where they have to be cap compliant, or if they're going to be a postseason return or not returned at all. So LTIR is the other part of that equation on what kind of cap space teams have, because LTIR will determine who can retain what too, because you'll also get third teams to retain money when it comes to Karlsson and other things. But he said there's a lot of conversation, but there's a lot of the clog right now, and it'll unclog by the deadline because these teams will have those answers. They'll have prorate, and they'll also have more of an indication on LTIR players.
Well, you make a good point. Like, I'll just use the Winnipeg Jets for example here, because they were one of the teams that Friedge mentioned would be looking at JVR. Right now, today, they have just under $6.5 million in cap space. Deadline, they're over $9 million.
Yeah.
So a lot of these teams that aren't operating in LTIR, and they're few and far between, but coincidentally, two of the teams that are tied to JVR right now are two of the playoffs teams not operating in LTIR, easy enough for me to say, with the Minnesota Wild and the Winnipeg Jets. Yeah. Even the Calgary Flames are one who, like, I think they have a lot of irons in the fire right now, which Dave Pagnotta has been reporting about a lot lately. But even them, they're a team that's going to gain over $1 million more over the next 2 weeks because they're not operating in LTIR. That may change if they shift Oliver Shillington to LTIR, but, the point still stands. So, I mean, a lot of these teams are just kind of like in standoff mode right now. Like, obviously you have some trades that got out ahead of the market, like the Vlad Tarasenko move specifically. And now you could probably say, well, the Rangers are done. But I mean, I don't think that the Flyers have a player right now that is I guess, coveted, if you will.
Because it's making a decision. You have these huge names. Tarasenko was a big one. He wanted out of St. Louis for years.
Yeah, you have the Ryan O'Reilly domino. You have the Timo Meyer domino. Even like Tyler Bertuzzi, like Dylan Larkin. Like, I still think he eventually stays in Detroit, but you still have that potential wrinkle in all of this. And to me, like, when you hear guys about like Nick Seeler and JVR, or even like a Patrick Brown, Justin Braun, like That's like 2 p.m. an hour before the deadline hits type of move. Maybe not so much JVR, but the other guys 100%.
Yeah, they're
And
fallback options for teams that maybe were going, for something bigger, didn't get it, or go, okay, let's just add a little depth here and a little security.
yeah. And Kevin Hayes is one. Obviously, like I was the first report, like early January, that he was available. But even that's kind of like a summer move because
Yeah.
of like the term on that contract. Teams will have more of an indication about what their offseason lookout is. And
He's
for
a
Ivan
reset your roster player. So is Provorov for a team.
Yeah, and Provorov, like I think that if the Flyers wanted to just get like a first round pick and two prospects, yeah, they could probably move him. Probably Edmonton would be looking hard at him. But like you said, like they were talking to LA, and I've heard through the grapevine that they wanted Byfield, and that's where it began and ended.
Yeah.
So I mean, the Flyers aren't looking for futures with Ivan Provorov. They want it to be kind of like a lateral move, and like you said, a lot of playoff teams aren't looking to subtract off their roster.
Edmonton better be careful, because if they trade their first round pick, they have their first round pick for 23.
First, I believe they do. I don't think they've traded
because that's a team that just goes weird at times. I mean, they lost to Montreal the other night 6-2, right?
Yeah,
and they could in some ways miss the playoffs, and then all of a sudden, like, that's a really good pick. Imagine if they fell far enough out of it and won the lottery and got Connor Bedard. So you'd have Connor McDavid, Connor Bedard, and Leon Draisaitl with Ryan Nugent Hopkins already there. Trade back for Taylor Hall. You have another number one overall. I mean, and bring Nail Yakupov out of whatever he's doing.
And the other thing about Edmonton is like their top 5 forwards all have no movement clauses, and Darnell Nurse has a no movement clause. So like they're really locked in with that core, right? So I think that Ken Holland is trying to double down. You've seen like the reported maybe framework of what an Erik Karlsson deal would look like. Centered around, pardon me?
2 first-round picks?
The one I saw was the first round pick this year. They do have it, and Evan Bouchard, who they drafted in the first round. I think it was 2018 they took Bouchard, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 2019. So I mean, that's 2 first round picks right there. And then I would imagine you would have like Puljujärvi going the other way for cap reasons. But again, that's not a slam dunk. It's not a slam dunk about Erik Karlsson, and you're committing how many years to Karlsson, even if the Sharks are eating. Yeah, so you're committing. And even if they're eating 35 or 40% of it, the Sharks are, I'm not sure like how much like cap relief that would be. He makes 11.5 per. I'm not good with math, but maybe his cap hit comes around somewhere in the 8s. So like, look, there's a lot of risk involved. And to your point, with a team like the Edmonton Oilers, there's always going to be that chance that it blows up in your face. And I mean, that's why at the deadline, maybe sometimes you see more of those like low risk, high reward moves. Like you trade a mid-round pick for a middle 6 guy. Like you see what the Rangers gave up for Vlad Tarasenko, and they get Mikkola, the defenseman. Yep. But I mean, that's like kind of like the biggest type of haul you'll see. It won't usually be like a massive deal. Like even like what Erik Karlsson got traded for. And I believe he got traded in September of 2018, I want to say. So, I mean, to your point, like the moves like Provorov, it's not a shock that it may not happen in season.
And you look at the Rangers too. Once, a guy like Keandre Miller developed the way he did, they can now use some of those D blue line prospects as equity to help their NHL club, because he's just so good. And I mean, look at what you got there on that. I mean, 3 players on that blue line. I love them all. Keandre Miller, Fox, and obviously I love Trouba.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was talking about, man, that'd be a target for the Flyers. For years, I was talking about Trouba. I always liked him. And I think he's a really good leader for that team too.
Yeah, and he was moved in the summer where the Flyers brought in Justin Braun and Matt Niskanen.
Yeah.
But obviously Trouba was, I believe his wife is from New York, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like he was one of the dozens of guys who kind of pigeonholed his way into going to New York. And like, hey, look, good for them. Like, I mean, it's kind of frustrating because obviously you hear a lot of people talking about like, they should emulate the way the Rangers did the rebuild. Well, like, it's easier said than done and because you hear it a lot of people like talking about Johnny Gaudreau, and that was kind of like, you could draw the comparison to Artemi Panarin, but it's not like they got Artemi Panarin and didn't do anything. They got Panarin, they got Jacob Trouba, They got Adam Fox. Like they had three very good players, one of which is one of the best defensemen in the NHL and a Norris Trophy winner, basically demand to go to the Big Apple. And I mean, the Flyers
And you already
obviously have,
had Kreider, and you already had Zibanejad. You had some
yeah.
pieces there too.
Yeah, Shesterkin was already drafted. Like it's
Yep.
not apples to apples. And
No.
look, the Flyers have a lot of work to do, clearly. I think they're taking baby steps, but they are in the right direction. But I mean, like in the case of Provorov, like I don't even think it's a slam dunk that he's traded
Yeah.
because like I was talking to someone yesterday and they said to me like they believe that the overall outlook of that top four looks a lot different now because of the way that York has played. Now, York has struggled since coming back from the All-Star break. I don't think the defense or the team in general has been as good since the return from the All-Star break. But I mean, you look at how Ristolainen has played. I think Provorov has been absolutely fantastic since the Christmas break.
Agreed.
And like I had someone tell me yesterday that York was outstanding in between the Christmas and the All-Star break, has struggled a bit here. And if you
York
could get
was great in the Edmonton game, though.
yeah,
He
yeah.
played really well in that game.
So like all in all, like you have Provorov, Cam York, Ristolainen, who have been really good. And Ristolainen, he's been good going back all the way to when he got scratched in early November.
Yeah.
So then you got to get Travis Sanheim right. Obviously, he's really fighting it right
He's
now.
been like this, like up and down.
Yeah, it's been tough, and I think it was the last game. Was it that they just lost? Was it Nashville that they just lost to?
Flat-footed on that 2-on-1.
Yeah, and you look at like some of the underlying numbers, like the impacts individually, and you look at how Sanheim had a terrible game and Ristolainen had a really good game. So you got to hope that a reunion between the two will help that out. I think D'Angelo has overall looked better alongside Nick Seeler, but he still has his major gaffes. And even D'Angelo's a guy that they've had no discussions internally about trading.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I asked yesterday, like, would you be okay rolling back with this defense next year? And I think that worst case they would be because, like you said, you're not going to trade Provorov unless you have a succession plan on that top pair.
Yeah, you're not just making that trade to make a bad trade. At this point, you can't make a bad trade. And the thing is, eventually Chuck Fletcher is going to speak here as we get closer to the deadline, and he's going to be asked about Provorov, I'm sure. And he's going to say, no, we love Ivan Provorov. We want to keep the player. And I know fans are going to freak out. Or Kevin Hayes, same thing. But again, that's what they say publicly because you don't want to put out there to teams like, oh, yeah, I want to get rid of him. So come with your bag of pucks and a 7th-round pick, and we'll give them to you. You got a posture. There's a lot that goes on there.
Yeah, and like I'm not of the belief of just trading Provorov for like even if you get a significant haul. Let's say that you got like a 1st-round pick, and let's just say they got him for Byfield plus whatever. I still worry about that defense. Would I still make the move because I love Byfield's upside? Yeah, of course. But then what are you doing on defense? Who's playing with Cam York? Like I don't think Cam York's a guy that is ready to just assume a role of, let's say, Victor Hedman or even what Provorov's playing. Like I kind of broke it down. I forget where I did it, but I did this somewhere. I've been doing a lot lately. But like you look at the minutes that Ivan Provorov plays, and it's not even so much about the even strength. It's the amount of time he plays down a man. Yeah. Like I think he averages like almost 3 minutes down a man, and the next closest guy is Ristolainen at 2 minutes, who plays with Provorov. So now you'd be asking Sanheim and York to each up their shorthanded time by 2 to 3 minutes a night. And a lot of people think like, oh, that's like whatever. But you hear former NHL defensemen talk like an extra 2-3 shifts a game. And if you're upping, it's good, especially in a shorthanded role. So, I mean, I'm not saying that Provorov's untouchable, and he isn't. He hasn't been going back to last season. But you also got to look at it and say, like, are we going to trade Provorov, not bring in a defenseman to play with Cam York or take some of those minutes away? And are we in any better of a spot? And I think it's a fair question to ask.
Yeah, and I think the answer is no, unless you're going to be able to replace Provorov. But replacing Provorov is two things: replacing the minutes and replacing the availability, because he's always in the lineup.
Yeah.
And the thing with Provorov too, I always look at PK minutes in a game as 2-1 in taxing on the body. Killing penalties is so taxing. It's exhausting because not in control for most of it, right? So those are like 2-to-1 minutes, and they're really important minutes. And the thing is, he's always available, and if you're the trickle down effect and the slotting changes so much if you don't have him. When you put guys like when we saw those injuries last year, I think it was, all of a sudden you're asking, guys like Ristolainen to be a top pair guy. As a second pair guy, that's fine. But as a top pair, the pedigree of what you got to deal with on the ice changes. And it's like, look at the faceoffs this year without Couturier and Giroux. You got Cates and Frost, and they're getting pantsed in the faceoff circle because they're facing the top faceoff guys. Now, if they were facing the second or third ranked faceoff guy for the Boston Bruins and not getting Bergeron, they're going to have a much better percentage in the dot.
Yeah.
That's slotting. So, Eric says, why not trade Sanheim and keep Provorov? Well, Sanheim right now is about ready to kick into a very long-term, huge deal and hasn't had a good season. So the return wouldn't be good at this time for a player like Sanheim. Provorov's got much less term and a very palatable number that he could easily be a good value contract as well.
Yeah, and look, like I share that sentiment. I thought that, I think the Sanheim contract will age all right, to be honest.
The cap's going to rise eventually.
The cap's going to rise. I don't think he's as bad of a player as we've seen this year. Whatever, there's something up with him. I think playing with D'Angelo was a really bad fit. I hope that, let's see what happens between him and Risto right now. But I think that they did jump the gun on it. I didn't really understand why it was such a pressing need to lock in Sanheim, because you were signing him based on last season, because I think that contract was signed before this year even started, the regular season.
Like the day before the season, and it was like right after the Mackenzie Weegar extension.
Yeah, and I was told that the Weegar extension is something that probably helped the Flyers keep that number down. But I just think that I didn't really understand why there was a pressing need to sign Sanheim. I get the sense, and this is this is me more just piecing stuff together, is that they aren't sure what they have in the AHL. I know everyone talks about Igor Zamula and Ronnie Attard, but I don't know if these guys are such slam dunks as we think. They'll probably be NHLers one day, but I mean, you hear a lot of people saying Sealer is blocking X prospect. And I don't think that's true.
No.
I think that what we've learned under John Tortorella is if you're a younger player and you deserve to play, you'll play. And you'll play big minutes. You've seen that with York. You've seen that with Frost. You've seen that with Noah Cates. But I don't know. I think there's maybe some trepidation here with the Flyers is to gut the team of NHL talent, move on from these players, and then you kind of force guys into a role that they're not ready for. And even a guy like Igor Zamula, I believe, I don't know if it was on your podcast, I think Russ Cohen was talking about how he's not even playing top pair in Lehigh Valley. Mm-hmm. And I'm just yeah, that sucks, but is that more of an indictment on the player, or is it an indictment on the coaching? So, I mean, I don't know. I don't track Lehigh Valley Phantoms games. It's just, I see it from the Flyers standpoint, but yes, from Sanheim's perspective, I did really kind of find it bizarre that they kind of forced that signing.
Yeah. And you look at the Phantoms, and there's a couple guys down there playing really well. They call up Ersson to go on this road trip right after Sandstrom. I thought what I thought was, the Jaden Schwartz goal was a bit of a subpar goal again. It was a great shot, high blocker just below the bar. But again, and we talked about this before, 4 occasions so far this year that I recall that I charted with Sandstrom on his glove hand side on a low play from down below the hash mark and a pass above the hash mark. He has not regained his feet on his glove hand side from a post integration, and he's gotten beat high glove twice, and he's also now gotten beat high blocker twice. In Europe, maybe you get away with that. In the Swedish league, you got to regain your feet in this league because you're not going to be able to get that shot. You're not going to be able to lift high enough to get that shot in the NHL. 2 things: players are closer in the NHL, and they can make that shot and get rid of it way quicker. So you got to regain your feet there. I don't know what he was doing.
Yeah, Sandstrom is a guy that he's been disappointing. I don't even know why I was high on him, but I thought he was going to prove to be a decent NHL backup here
He
But
came in last year in like that San Jose game that he lost last year, like 45 save. He was good. He made,
yeah,
he's a competent goaltender, but there's just that one goal in a game that he can't give up that he seems to give up.
yeah, and like, look, I still think that it was a good decision to see what you have in him this year. Like, you
Mhm.
had to, right? Like, he was drafted what, like almost 8 years ago now. But
2015.
and obviously Urson gets called up. I was just texting with someone a couple minutes ago, and I was told that he's not going to go on waivers. Sandstrom, that is.
No, they're carrying
So,
three.
pardon me.
They're carrying three
Yeah, they're going to carry three, and I think Grossneck has been hurt for a while here, right?
since like the first week of the season. I think so.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that they don't want to, I guess, bring up a goaltender who's probably not even AHL caliber. So you're going to carry three here. I mean, I get the sense that John Torrell is not the biggest fan of Felix Sandstrom, and obviously Urson, I think, proved earlier in the year that he's better than Sandstrom and NHL caliber at this point. So they're going to carry three. I mean, you don't want to overload Carter Hart either, especially with his injury history. And at this point, I think Sandstrom is signed until next year. And
Mhm.
so, I mean, you have some options with him. I know that everyone thinks that he won't get claimed on waivers, and maybe he doesn't. Maybe he doesn't, for all I know. But I think that they just really don't want to run that risk where you only have Hart and Urson as
Yeah.
NHL caliber goaltenders, or even AHL caliber goaltenders to this point. Like, I don't even know who's playing for the Phantoms right now that Urson got called up. But like, now you're going into waters where like there's guys that shouldn't even probably be in the AHL potentially as your number
They're supposed
three
to be
option.
goalies. Yeah, goalies from the ECHL, basically.
Yeah,
Three.
so I mean, I understand it. Obviously, three goalies isn't the best type of scenario. There's two nets, and you're always going to have one guy on the outside looking in. And obviously, that's going to be Felix Sandstrom for a bit, but I don't really blame them at the same time for wanting to have a backup option in case of injury.
Yeah, you can go from being really set at goalie to being in a hurry
Yeah.
because you just don't carry the amount of goalies in your organization like you do wingers or centers or D-men or skaters. You just don't. And I mean, we saw it a couple of years ago where they go through 7 that season, and we saw Mike McKenna, Cal Pickard. I mean, we saw them all. I mean,
Yeah, that
crazy.
was that Brian Elliott was still here, Neuwirth.
Yeah, I thought it was.
Yeah,
I don't know.
so
Noivy might have been gone by that point.
who?
That might have
Elliott?
been no. Neuvert might have been gone by that point, or
But
maybe
I
that was
think
last year here.
that was Stolars was there, and then they traded Stolars for Talbot. That was the year where shit hit the fan with Hexy and Hackstall.
Yeah,
That was that year. And look, I mean, that I think for like I really wasn't a fan of the way that Hexy managed stuff here, but I will never be able to understand how a former goaltender did what he did. That to me was so befuddling that he kept going back to the well with Michael Neuwirth and then Brian Elliott. Like,
yeah,
do you remember that year in 17-18, which was by far the best year under Ron Hextall, where like they played Elliott like 16 games in a row?
yeah.
Like, just like, and
In
like,
March, and it was late too, and you had to know going into that Neuvert couldn't stay healthy.
no,
Just
it's
couldn't.
crazy. And he was a good goalie when he was
Oh, yeah,
healthy.
he was. He just couldn't. I remember one time the team took warm-ups. This is when I was still doing all my stuff downstairs, right in the hallway where they line up to walk out. It's literally from my broadcast desk, look right out the door. It's right there. And Neuvert takes warm-ups, comes back out, gets at the front of the line to go out on the ice for the game. And then all of a sudden pulled the chute, and was out. Took all warm-ups as the starter, the whole thing. In the hallway. Bent over and was just there. Something happened, popped something, he was out.
I
He
remember
hugged it and dressed.
I remember he had a PT. The last time I heard of him, sound like I texted the guy. But the last time I heard of Michael Neuwirth, I think it was the 2019-20 season. Yeah, because Mike Babcock was still the coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs. So it was going into that season, where a season he ultimately got canned in. And I think that was the year after the Flyers let him go once and for all. And he was signed to a PTO, and he was going to be Frederick Anderson's backup. And he looked good, and then he got hurt like 2 preseason games in, and they were just like, yeah, the hell with this guy. Like
Yeah.
you
He's
can't.
just not going to be reliable. Shame
It's
because
too bad. It's really too bad.
he was, I mean, he was a good goalie. I mean, he comes in, remember, against Washington in that one game, and it just was unbelievable in the playoffs. Was at the game 7 when Mason was still here. That Mason's last year. So, Michael messages in and says, speaking of future D guys, can you speak about Emil Andre and as a potential chemo Timonin light? Chemonin is what he put. It's chemo Timonin. But I actually saw chemo Timonin the other night. Was it? I guess it was the 2010s night, the Edmonton game, and I was walking from downstairs to go up to where we do the intermissions from, and there's Timonin coming by, and still fit as a fiddle. Chemo looks like he could still play. Big smile on his face, big Finnish smile. Had a
He's
chance to talk to
scouting
him.
now, isn't he, for them?
Yeah, yep, yep. And he's a guy that when he played, I didn't talk to him a whole heck of a lot. There's a few guys through my time doing the 15 years of doing pre-intermission and post that don't like to come off the ice right to an interview. So don't do in-game interviews, or even if you do them post-game, they like to go in and get changed and then come in and sit down. And Chemo was one of those guys. Provorov's another one of those guys. But Chemo was locked in the game, wanted to get back to the room, get the boots off, let the dogs air out a little bit, get the feet feeling good again before you put the skates back on for the next period. I mean, that's a guy's prerogative to do that, but good to see Chemo the other night. But as far as Emil Andre, I mean, we had Alex Appleyard on, who's really good with the European guys, and he's having a really good year, is Andre. But I mean, he's far away. Like he's got to come over first and then get assimilated over here. So
Which he probably will do. I'm not sure when the Swedish league ends, but I remember being told in the summer following the World Junior Hockey Championship. Remember they had the 2022 one in August. That the plan is for when his season ends over there, he's going to be brought over to the Phantoms maybe to finish the year. I think he's probably your best chance at having a number one, even though I don't think he's going to be. But I think that maybe he has a higher ceiling than York. I love Cam York. I really like it. And even the Flyers know they don't have a number one right now.
Yeah.
But I think that what they're trying to do is trying to build like a defense, kind of like what you're seeing in Calgary or what you're seeing. Well, St. Louis, obviously not really a good example this year because of how bad they've been, but where you have kind of just like steadiness throughout all your three pairs, like a bunch of 2s and 3s. And I think that you have
like post Pietrangelo St. Louis Blues.
Exactly, where you have like Krug and Parayko and Falk and Scandella, like guys like that. And I think right now with the Flyers, like you have a 2 in Ivan Provorov. Cam York, I think, is playing probably like a 3, and obviously this is objective. Sanheim, you got to get right, but I think when he's on his game, he's a 3. Ristolainen this season has proved to be like a good number 4 or 5. D'Angelo, I think. So, like, look, there's you could kind of see what they're going for, but you really like to have that stud number 1. It makes your life a whole lot easier. And I think Elliot Friedman said this, that aside from the Pittsburgh Penguins in 2017, every team going back like the last like 20 years has had like a defenseman on their roster who has gotten a Norris Trophy vote, like something like we're nominated, something along those lines. So there really is tough to pull it off without one of those high-end defensemen. But I mean, it's been done before, and there are a lot of teams that have to operate without a true elite number 1, like even the Toronto Maple Leafs. Like, I mean, Morgan Riley, I think is a number 1 maybe, but like he's not very good defensively and he's not having a great season right now. And they kind of have a do it by committee approach as well with like TJ Brody when he was healthy. They had Jake Muzzin. Now they have the 2 younger kids in Liljegren and Sandin who are playing well. Giordano's there. So, I mean, it's tough to find those elite number 1s. And if you could just have a bunch of good 2s and 3s, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, you can get by with it. And the thing is, too, is you see these teams like Toronto or you see the Edmonton Oilers, they're trying to add to their blue line, but they're trying to add offensive defensemen, guys that have a hard time. Like I see what Edmonton's doing. I got a text from a guy and goes, Edmonton's trying to get Carlson for a team that doesn't defend well. Why get a defender that can't defend well? Their hope is just to be playing in transition in the offensive zone all the time. And he'd obviously, the way he's playing this year would be spectacular at that. But it doesn't help you in the playoffs, I think, because the game changes. So you have to be able to defend. Like the Tampa Bay Lightning learned it. You can't beat teams 5-2, 6-3 in the playoffs. It's just you got to be able to win those games, and you also got to be able to win the 2-1, 3-2 games, and that's where the teams have a really hard time in those super tense the game is hanging on a razor's edge. That's where they have a hard time because you need a guy that can go out there and not only defend but just calm a game down with a shift. Instead of trying to push offense, just calm a game down, play between from the top of the circle to the top of the circle. Nothing else gets lower and nothing gets to the inside.
Yeah, and that's what Matt Niskanen was really good at, right? Being able to calm it down, and
on the bench too.
Yeah, like, and that's like kind of what you need, right? Like the Flyers haven't had like that veteran leader, I think, on the back end since Matt Niskanen. Obviously Justin Braun, but I think when you're a third pairing guy, it doesn't carry as much weight, which is just normal, right? Like Niskanen was a guy
Ellis was brought in for, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like Ryan Ellis was the best type of replacement, and I think he's even better defenseman than Matt Niskanen was. I remember thinking when Niskanen retired, I really wanted them to go get Chris Tanev. Like he seemed just like the prototypical best, like carbon copy of Matt Niskanen. Obviously goes to Calgary, and he's meant a world for Calgary. And you see what happened to Quinn Hughes. Maybe not so much this year, but in the immediate departure of Tanev, you saw what happened to Quinn Hughes. So, I mean, look, the Flyers are still kind of searching for that. Obviously, D'Angelo isn't like a calming presence, but I mean, Ristolainen, you're trying to turn into that. You're trying to change his game. But yeah, I think York has that demeanor in the way he plays. Obviously, you could speak more to him as a person, but like he probably thinks the game the best of any defenseman they have right now.
Mm-hmm. And like he's got a unique skating style, and it looks so effortless, right? And smooth, but and he is really chill. Like, I mean, if I talk to him in between periods or right after a game, it's very like almost like he just got done a meditation. Like he's so calm and just relaxed in his approach, doesn't get overwhelmed. But I will tell you this, though, he's got a tremendous amount of confidence.
Yeah.
Like he definitely has got some swagger to him. Like you need that. You need to have that to make plays.
Yeah. Well, no, you have to. And you heard John Tortorella why they sent him down earlier in the year, that he was playing like too reserved. And then I think, I forget who talked about it, maybe been on your show, but like that Cam York, maybe it was Charlie O'Connor that was brought up on this show about how like Cam York was intimidated by John Tortorella. So he didn't want to be too freewheeling and all that. And it kind of affected his game indirectly. And like Cam York is a guy that I think has a style of play that fits the current day of the NHL, that he can control it, that he can really kind of control a breakout. I remember you talking about like the center defense type of role that Morgan Frost brought up. And like, look, I think that like power play wise, maybe he's not as dynamic as we thought. Like I would still say Tony DeAngelo is like a better fit up there. But again, like, if he's not like the cream of the crop power play wise, like I don't think it's the end of the world. Like there's a lot.
PP2.
Exactly. And it's fine, like you even have like, I don't think Victor Hedman, maybe this year, but maybe this year he's playing top pairing, but I know a lot of not top pairing, top power play, but even Sergachev, I think, has gotten looks up there. Like it doesn't always have to be your number one. Like Jacob Slavin's another example. Like he's the best defensive defenseman in the NHL by a wide margin, in my opinion, but he's not out there quarterbacking a power play. Yeah. But obviously Cam York has kind of a reputation of being an offensive guy. But I think maybe that's more about moving the puck up in transition, thinking the game well, getting it out of danger. And look, if he's not a top-end power play guy, that's fine. You have some more guys in the AHL. Maybe Adder becomes that. Maybe you hang on to D'Angelo more beyond next season. Like they have options here. They have options. And yes, you still are looking for that number one. But the overall look of the blue line, I don't think is as grim as a lot of people make it out to be. Obviously, without that number one, it kind of leaves a lot to be desired. But as someone said to me yesterday, if you have Provorov, York, and Sanheim and Ristolainen all playing to their capabilities, and I think save for Sanheim, we've seen the other three play that role, that's two solid top pairs. Obviously, you'd like to see what happens in the playoffs. That's a completely different animal. But, I mean, you could do a hell of a lot worse than that.
I remember reading this study that was done. I forget who tweeted it out. I'll have to see if I can find it and I'll retweet it again. But since 2000, the teams that got to a Stanley Cup final had an average. No, it was earlier in 2000. I think it was like 2009 through 2021. The teams that got just, the two teams that got to the final had an average size on their blue line of like 6'3" and a half, 215 pounds.
Yeah.
And I looked at that and I go, that's really interesting, because do you need to be big on the back end, even in today's game, but this is recent, to get through 4 rounds of a playoff? Like, you got to have that size back there, because you need to be able to punish guys when they're trying to get inside, and you still need that size in the NHL. The game is probably more, there's more small players that can be effective now than ever before. In the 80s, you couldn't be the size of Johnny Gaudreau and survive. You couldn't be 160 pounds. You wouldn't make it out of the, first half of the season. But now you can, with the rules and everything else and the way the game is played. No red line, it opened up, and so skilled. But do you still need that size on the back end? That's one thing I worry about with, Cam York. And eventually, if this team is a team that can go on multiple round playoffs, you got to be big on the back end. And they still could use a little size. They're obviously Ristolainen's big. Sanheim's big, but doesn't play a big power game. Sealer's big, but he's not going to be part of the long term here. So you do need a little size back there for sure. So, well, we certainly covered a lot in this episode. Who's been sneaky good down there with the Phantoms is Elliot Denoyer. 2 goals the other night again, 17 goals.
He's a guy that, he's playing center now. He's playing second line, I believe, behind an ICYMI. And I mean, he's someone that you have to keep an eye on. And, like, I've started looking at what we could potentially be seeing for next season. Obviously, it depends on what Sean Couturier ends up being a lot. But I'm starting to think maybe your 3-4 season next year are Noah Cates and Elliot Denoyer. And I mean, obviously it depends on what happens if they can bring in a top line center, but I wonder if a guy like Denoyer could maybe put some pressure on Morgan Frost, because or unless he shifts to wing. But I mean, it's very it's encouraging here that they have a homegrown center coming out through their system. Not to say he's going to be a top line guy, but he's really going to be, I think he's going to be a player, and he's probably going to be a player here next year, I think. And because you look at a guy like Patrick Brown, he's not here long-term. Lazinski's injured, but I think, unfortunately, the racetrack has run out for Tanner Lazinski, more so just because he can't stay healthy. But it seems like there's an open path for Denoyer to be a staple on this team next season.
Yeah, I agree with you. He's definitely, trending towards being a definite NHL player. Best case scenario, middle 6, probably bottom 6. But hey, you need those guys too. He doesn't solve your problem when it comes to high-end talent. Last thing here, let's get to Michael N. Kamines. I'm not sure how to say it, but Michael, thanks for the note. He said, loved your info on Larkin and the Flyers' interest/need for center. That's how your reports are on Dylan Larkin. And any chance the Flyers surprise us and go for the Sharks' Timo Meier or Tyler Bertuzzi, future playoff Bertuzzi and future playoff Risto on the same team? No. Timo, I just don't think they're in a position to do it. He's got a $10 million qualifying offer as an RFA. Any team that trades for him is going to want to sign him, obviously bring that number way down. I just don't think they're in a position right now for a player like Timo Meier in the situation that he's in.
Yeah, I mean, I actually just dropped out there for a second. My internet went down, so I came back in flawlessly, thank God. But yeah, Meier, I think he has a $10 million qualifying offer. They're going to trade a haul to get him. The Flyers want to add a center, as I reported last week, and 32 Thoughts mentioned it yesterday that they're in the market for centers. And I love Tyler Bertuzzi. I love that player. I think he could really help this team. I think that left wing is a position that they could stand to upgrade, not as pressing as center, but certainly could stand to upgrade. I don't know if those are the types of players that the Flyers are going to take big swings for, especially Meier, because you'd be sacrificing so much of your futures. Bertuzzi, obviously, it would be way less of a haul to get him in here. But I just think that first and foremost, they need to find a top line center, a top 6 center long term. I think that absolutely is the priority here, because I like everything well, not everything, that's an exaggeration, but I've liked a lot of what I've seen this year about building towards the future, seeing how that middle six, bottom six is shaping up. Their goaltending is very encouraging for the foreseeable future. The defense could be better, but not as grim as, let's say, we once thought, because of York. Provorov's game really turning around the last 2 months or so. Ristolainen's career renaissance. But it's all going to be for naught if you don't have that top line center. Dylan Larkin, I think that 100% is a name that they would go after. I was told that if he makes it to free agency. I'm skeptical if he gets there, and if he's not available, then you have to look the trade route. And obviously, top line centers are a lot hard to come by than arguably any commodity in the NHL. Like centermen are just so tough.
It's why you got to find out what Couturier is. That's why he needs to come back this year. And you got to see if he can come back and play and stay healthy and without setback going into the offseason. And then obviously the other guy that you talk about center, we can debate whether he's a center or a winger when he first comes in, is Cutter Gauthier. I'd like to see him go back for another year because I think that there's a lot to be gained there by him going back. You look at a guy like Matty Beniers or Owen Power. They all went back for a sophomore year. Beniers is a second overall pick. Owen Power's the number 1 overall pick. It's not an indictment on the pick. So I would like to see him go back, but he was pretty adamant when I talked to Cutter on draft night that he wanted to go play 1 year of college and get right to the show.
Can't blame an 18-year-old for wanting that.
Yeah, of a kid.
Can't blame an 18-year-old for wanting that. And look, they have a lot of question marks. It's not all grim. I mean, I wonder what it means for a guy like Morgan Frost, because I think that Frost has had a good season process-wise. I think like his underlying game is really good. I think that he's learned to play center in a responsible fashion this year. But then, Charlie O'Connor has beat this drum a lot, so I'll give him credit, is that like it just begs the question of what Morgan Frost is when he's not producing points. And I think
the other day did something I have not heard him do.
What did he do?
It was the Nashville game. He said in the post game that he thought Frost was really good in the game, and I think it's the first time he gave him accolades and some hype when he didn't score. Because oftentimes Torts would say, "Yeah, there's a lot there, but I need him on the score sheet. Need to finish it," and he didn't. And Frost had a really good game, but didn't end up on the score sheet. So that's progress.
Yeah, and I think Frost is a guy that has struggled with confidence a lot in his career. And you know what? I think he's had a good year, like from what we were expecting. But the thing is like I think he's still only on pace for like 40 points. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of like the question mark for me, is like he's not a guy that I could really see playing a bottom six role like a Denway or a Cates. And if you're not a 40-point player, can you be counted on as a top six center in the NHL? And I think he's gotten like arguably at times the Flyers' best line mates. Like he's been with JVR and Tippett for quite a while now. It's been a good line. Like obviously, maybe he could play with Konechny, but I mean, aside from Konechny, JVR and Tippett have been their 2 best wingers more often than not. So I question like where he stands long term. Not because he's not a good player. It's just more so the team and what the team needs right now. I feel like their
construction.
Yeah, because they need a top six center. They absolutely need one. And I'm not sure if he's produced enough in terms of raw points to be able to say like, okay, he's one of the guys moving forward. And I think that the ship of him playing wing for this team has long sailed. It's clear that they have no interest in that. It's kind of center or bust here. And like I said, he's had a good year. He's learned to play responsible defensive hockey. I just question whether or not he's produced enough to have carved out a job long term, especially when you keep hearing what I've heard, what they talked about on 32 Thoughts, that they still are looking to go big game hunting for a centerman.
Like we talk about this year, and we keep saying this year is to find out who's who and what's what, who's part of the future and who's not. But the 82 games this year is not a hard deadline for every player. Some players are going to warrant. I was talking to Bill Meltzer about this on the podcast for Flyers Daily on Monday, that some players are warranting more of a look and more time to see if they develop further Frost, I think, falls into that category. Some players, when we get done this season, you're going to go, okay, he's not part of it, or he is part of it.
Like
And there's
Liz.
going to be and other players are going to have to go, because you can't just go ship everybody out. This isn't the NBA where you just go, let's send this guy here and this guy there with the hard cap. So some players are going to get a little more looks not the right word, but are going to remain, and you're going to continue to evaluate what they are. And then at some point you're going to be presented either with a move on for, whether the player's contract is up or a trade proposal or whatever. But, and I think that Frost falls into that category. If he's going to be a top 6 guy, he's going to be a 55+ point guy. Minimum.
So like, let's say they had a chance, just for funsies, they had a chance to sign Larkin, and you figure out that Couturier could be like a 75% what he once was, like a 60-point responsible second line center. Is Frost a guy that you consider moving on from, if that in that context?
Well, I think you have to, because if you're going to have Noah Cates as your third line center.
Yeah.
And Frost obviously not going to play fourth line. That doesn't make any sense for him.
And Denway seems like he's fast tracking to that.
Yeah, and you don't want to pay a lot at that position either. Frost isn't going to command a ton of money, but still, you got to look at roster construction. It's not just about lining up the 4 most skilled guys at the center position.
Exactly.
You have to have them. You have to build your team properly. Like, we've seen teams with tons of talent that can't win because they don't have guys that can do the hard work or grimy things. You need the grimy guys. You need all of that to win. So roster construction is paramount, which also goes back to kind of where we started with Provorov and slotting. Like, you have to have proper roster construction for guys to fill certain roles. You have to have your good penalty killers. You have to have your good defenders. You have to have your good high-end offensive players. You got to also have, on your blue line, puck movers and stay-at-home guys, and they got to fit together perfectly. And that's the only chance you have. Let's just add Connor Bedard. Screw Larkin. Let's get Connor Bedard in the middle. Him, Couturier, and Noah Cates are your 3 centers. Boom. There we go.
That would not be too bad. And the other thing is that, like, I still think that they have a chance in this draft to get a long-term 1C. Maybe not next year, but like, if you take like a Brandon Yeager type of thing, like, I think that if you're in the top 12, like, you have a chance to get a long-term number 1 center here. And like, you look at a guy like, let's say, Will Smith. I think Bob McKenzie had him ranked 6th. I got a prospect ranking that he was ranked, I think, 9 or 10. I think Bob McKenzie said that he may have the best hockey IQ in the game. So long-term, you may have like a 1C carved out, but I don't think the Flyers are looking for next year to be a stagnant year. I think they want to take another step. And I think that's where, and Merrick said this too yesterday, is that like, they do like a lot of their players. Like, I think the fans are in, and I understand it given on what's gone on here the last 24 months, but I think the fans are at a point where they just want to sell everybody for anything because they're just kind of in that mode of just got everything. But there still are good players here, and I don't think that they want to embark on a 3 to 5 year rebuild. They're already rebuilding. They've been rebuilding.
They haven't called it that doesn't mean that it hasn't been happening.
Look, they've pretty much told you without telling you that they've been in a rebuild recently. Like, for all intents and purposes, since they traded Giroux, they've been kind of rebuilding. Yeah. They traded assets to bring in Tony DeAngelo, which was very questionable. But aside from that move, since they traded Giroux, they've pretty much been operating as in a rebuild. They didn't go big game hunting in free agency. They've signed depth players to help the culture. They've tried to given all these young kids a chance to play in prominent roles on hockey teams. Like, going back to the Giroux trade, save for the DeAngelo acquisition, was just because of pure desperation to get a right shot defenseman in here, which I don't agree with. You might as well just sign John Klingberg at that point. They've been operating like a rebuild, and they're going to continue operating like a rebuild. But they're going to take baby steps because they're not doing a rebuild akin to Chicago or Arizona where you tear it down to the studs and come back up. Yeah. They're doing it more like a Los Angeles, let's say, where they slowly sold off some pieces like Muzzin and Alec Martinez and I think Jeff Carter. But then along the way, they traded for a guy like Victor Arvidsson or they traded for a guy, it blew up in their face, but like a Kovalchuk, or last summer they went big game hunting, they took a swing for Kevin Fiala. Like, I think that's more what we're seeing, and they hung on to guys like Doughty and Quick and Kopitar, and I believe there's one more other one that's escaping me, but I think that's more of the type of rebuild that we're looking at.
Yeah, boy, Kempy's been on a heater too, man.
Yeah, Kempy, yeah,
Ooh.
he's been good.
No
Fiala's been a good ad too.
Yeah, no doubt. Very good. Michael says, Stick Taps, boys, you make my week. Well, thank you, Michael. Stick Taps to everybody for listening. Thanks for watching. We'll be back coming up on Thursday. Ant San Filippo is going to join us coming up on Thursday, I believe.
I haven't heard from him in a while.
Yeah, he had COVID. He was going to come on last, I think it was Friday, but he said he's got COVID again. He says he feels fine, but he just sounded horrible.
Okay.
Like his voice was just gassed. So we wanted to push a week. So he's going to join us coming up later this week, hopefully. And we'll get Anthony Sanfilippo on. We haven't talked to him in a while here on Stick to Hockey Live. And great stuff. Where can people read your stuff? Fourthperiod.com?
Fourthperiod.com. A story dropped last night. Expecting to get another one out by the end of the week. And obviously, shit's going to pick up here with the trade deadline just over 2 weeks away.
Yeah, make sure like on your browser, you hit that little star at the top that favorites the fourthperiod.com between Ant, Dave Pagnotta, and the whole crew up there. They're going to have great stuff leading up to the deadline as always. And check that out as well. And at A DeMarco 25 on Twitter, give Ant a follow there. All right, everybody, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you Thursday on a brand new edition of Stick to Hockey Live.